So here we go. We're getting ready to start gardens. If you're an experienced gardener, um, we're going to start talking about beginner stuff like how do you choose what beds you want. But I think it can be thought provoking like, do I want to switch over or do I really have perhaps other areas in my garden where I might be able to find some more sun? And there are a lot of resources later on as well. So we're going to zip through that. The finding where to put your beds and things like that. So let's see. Oh, I want to remind you that there is a Bainbridge Island Fruit Club before we start. It's mostly tree fruit, but you can find a link for it in the resource page, and I encourage you to join that as well. We have amazing resources. So this is what you're going to get tonight. We're going to figure out where to grow, even if you don't have any space. You might have a place to grow near you, and how to choose your beds and set up your soil and when to dig things and get planting calendars. You're going to have varieties, how to find varieties that grow your best here, and how to really make yourself feel like a food growing genius by growing big, thriving plants. And then 8 pages of resources. And that's what we're going to do. First, where are you going to put it? Well, here's a little quiz question for you. And I ask this question because I very often get called by people who have set up the whole garden with the thought that the vegetable garden can go in some corner where we won't see it. But that often, especially around here, is a shady spot or a spot that is shaded by those tall trees just over the property line. So I think that a vegetable garden, even one that is not as charming as this one, looks great. And so it's fine to find your sunniest spot if you currently have the power to change where things are, or if you're, thinking of replacing that barbecue patio and maybe moving it somewhere. I would definitely say give your vegetables priority for the sun because they will look more beautiful and they will feed you better. So one way to find your sun is to do what's called sun mapping. So here's a little cartoon version of a sun map. And it's just paying attention to your garden, but it requires you to go out every couple of hours and either make notes or more typically you crosshatch or shade the shady areas. So you go out at 8 and you shade wherever there's shade in your garden. And it doesn't have to be to scale because you're going to use things like little landmarks to tell you how far the shade goes. Like this patch of shade, whoops, this is a really oversensitive computer. This patch of shade here, I just said it was within the bounds of the square made by the house. And you might say this shade is halfway to my trees, and you just generally patch it in. It means that you have to pay attention to your garden as soon as the sun shows up. So it's like 8 o'clock. And then every couple of hours you go out again, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, maybe you've lost your light by then. It doesn't mean you have to stay home all day because you can do like the 8 o'clock and the 10 o'clock and then take off to do your day. And then you realize a couple of days later that you're there at, noon and 2, and a few days later that you're there for the later hours. And so it doesn't matter that you don't do it on the same day. At one point, I found it so frustrating to find my sunny spots, and exactly how many hours I was getting on this hot end of my house. This is actually sort of a sketch of my house that I wrote on the house with chalk. I went like here, 8 o'clock, here, noon. And it's not because I'm just that uptight, because I did not do it for like 15 years. And then I went, how come we keep messing this up? So, and things keep dying. So I did just do that one time, just once. So that is why I eventually did sun map, because really it seems like an overkill, but it can be productive. So here's a sun map, and I would put the heat lovers here, the sun lovers here, and then fill in the rest of it with vegetables. But you don't have to do that because now we have phones. So this person took a picture every hour for a while and realized they only have 2 hours of sun. But you could do that, especially if you have a 2-story house, just like take the screen off and lean out the window and just keep taking photos. There are also apps which are fun to play with. These are two apps. There's Lumos and Sunseeker. I'm not sure if Lumos still exists, but Sunseeker is on, anyway, they're on the resource page. And what you do, you don't point it at your garden. You stand where you wonder if you have enough sun for a garden. You stand there and you point it all over the southern sky, even up and to the west and all over the place until you see either the dots on the left or the lines on the right, depending on your app. And it will show you where the sun is. The cool thing about these is you could do this on December 20th in the dark, and it would show you where your sun is. And you can set it. So the picture on the right was taken on April 7th. The yellow line is where the sun is at 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. on April 7th. So we can see that it's behind, once that tree leaps out, that 6 p.m. sun is going to be behind that tree, and the 7 p.m. sun is going to be behind that hill. This person, though, also got a line on here. The red one is the solstice. That's when the sun is highest in the sky. So you can see that 6 p.m. is much higher. In the case of this picture, it's still behind a tree branch. So maybe this person is going to pick a different area in their garden and try again. Maybe they're going to prune that tree back and just keep fighting it. But it gives you information so you can find out where is the best spot in your garden. Has anybody used a sun app? Holler if you have. Doesn't sound like it. Okay.
John has a question about since daylight changes by month, what month should sun mapping be done?
Oh, yeah. Well, ideally, so you probably want to get started now. So this is not the best time because it's gray a lot. I'm sorry, it's not the best time to do it in the traditional way because the sun is going to be so low. But these apps you can do anytime because they will tell you where your maximum, even at the solstice, they'll give you information at the solstice. So if you're using an app, this is good. Otherwise, if you're going to map, if I were starting gardening, I'd be eager to like set up my beds and get my soil and stuff like that. But if you're not using an app, you will have to wait to site your garden. I would say till like probably April, maybe sunny end of March. You can do it before that, but you have to imagine the sun being higher in the sky. So that's like further north. Every point you can see on the picture on the right, every point is further north. So it ends up being more overhead. So you could do it even without an app. And you look for your sunniest spots, but then you compensate by looking at the trees and going, oh, that's really sunny now, but once the trees grow in, that's not going to be as sunny.
So excuse me, so when you buy seed and whatnot, it always tells you, how much sun, shade, part sun type of thing. Is that all based on summer solstice? Sunlight at summer solstice?
No, it's actually based on hours of sun. Because that's often like berry bushes and stuff, right?
Yeah, but I mean the sun at summer solstice, it's coming north of the due east, right? And then at winter solstice, it's coming way south of east. So the amount of time that sun's up in the air is less in this winter than the summer, obviously. So the daylight.
Oh, so when they just say part sun, full sun. So you're saying when it just says part sun, what does that mean?
Well, if I were to go out and do it now, I'd get less hours on each spot of my garden than if I did it at summer solstice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I meant by you have to look, you have to imagine that the sun is higher in the sky and figure out your hours. So that's the advantage of the apps, because usually when you draw it, you want to be doing it in like April.
So the app must average it. The app must average it out or something rather than, I'm guessing. Maybe.
The app determines by your location where the sun will be on the solstice. So that red line figures out where you are. The app figures out where you are and it tells you where you're going to see the sun in the sky. But a full sun thing, wants more than 6 hours of light, right?
Okay.
Okay. And your front yard might be your better spot. And I just want to give you some inspiring pictures so that you can know that there are a lot of people in this area who have food in their front yard. And I don't know if non-food growers recognize that it's food in the front yard. But it works out. If your neighbors or your personal sense of order requires order, boxes are a good way to help people know that you care for that place. So the upper left here in this picture helps people know that this is intentional, even when your beds are empty. The one on the right, that's all ornament, that's all food in the low front bed in front of the porch there. And a lot of the ornamental bed in the middle has food in it. This is overcrowded, I think, for the photo. So if you see the blue-gray guys right here, those cabbages are quite crowded, which is why they're little. They're like 6 inches across. They may have done it for effect. Personally, I like to prioritize the health of the vegetables, and I want to grow really big vegetables and help you grow healthy veg. So if you are going to put them into an ornamental bed, if you have like perennials that are aggressive or anything that's going to compete with them, that's going to give a disadvantage. So if you want to grow the bigger, healthier stuff, you might want to sort of isolate an area or make sure the perennials aren't crowding it. And perennials have big roots that go out from their body, right? So the plant is this wide and the roots are, coming out into the soil. So they're very effective at competing. And if you are a very artsy person, an artistic person, and you'd like to do something more complicated, there's a book by Nikki Jabbour. And you note that she's drawn these, though, because no garden has all the plants looking perfect all the time. So you shouldn't feel bad if you have empty beds or lettuces that have just started and things like that, tomatoes that are finishing up and not looking perfect. But that's on your resource page as well. And I'd like to point out that, in my opinion, just vegetables growing, they don't look that bad. So that's just squares dug into the ground with plants in them. And some debris on the lawn there, but that's just because we hadn't mowed it into the lawn yet. So that's my front yard, that's my side yard. So once you find out how much sun you have, what can you grow there? This is on the resource page. So full sun is considered at least 6 hours. If you have 12, you can grow anything. But around here, it's kind of hard to find that sometimes. So all the things in this list, almost all of them, are making what we call fruit, which is like an object with seeds inside of it, a fleshy thing with seeds inside of it, or seeds themselves, right? It takes a lot of sun to grow a big plant and then have that plant also have enough sun to make a lot of fruit and then ripen that fruit. So that's why the areas in your garden where you have more hours of the sun, you would be smart to reserve for these guys, for these kinds of plants. If you get 4 to 6 hours in some other area or in your whole garden, these things that are leaves and roots tolerate more afternoon shade. Ideally, they tolerate less sun. They would rather have morning sun because they like not to get too hot, but they will tolerate 4 to 6 hours of sun. And these last ones, if you have 3 to 4 hours, these things in this category, basically the previous category, but they'll grow a lot slower. And often when they're in the sun, they never look really like they're very thirsty because they're not sun stressed, but they can get very dry roots. And that actually invites something called powdery mildew. So when you grow in the shade, I would say make sure that the soil is watered and mulched so that it doesn't dry out. You probably don't want to do overhead watering and like spray the leaves because it increases the humidity. So it's best to keep them moist from below. And that could be just having a water wand that you just run along the soil. You don't have to set up like a soil level drip line, although you could. Does anybody grow in 4 to 6 in 3 or 4 hours? Do you grow food in a not very sunny place? Nope.
Well,
Okay.
I do.
Oh.
I don't have much sun, and the tomatoes are not happening, but the peas seem to do
Mhm.
well. But
Yeah, peas
I need
like
to
it cool.
yeah, I need to move my spot, and I get some beans. Beans seem to do okay, but tomatoes,
That's good. Are the peas your most successful thing in that lower light?
yeah, right. Yeah, right now.
That's good. Great. Thanks, Judy. So if you have no garden space or you want more of it, you need a pea patch. And pea doesn't stand for the vegetable, it stands for Picardo, which was the family in Seattle who first started a pea patch. So this is a pea patch on Bainbridge Island. And the way it works is that that box is gardened by one person, and each of these other boxes is gardened by another different person. So you get not only a place to grow, but information, and you can ask fellow gardeners how they do things. Often a pea patch has shared tools, which is happening over here. These guys also have a shared greenhouse. They actually have a greenhouse team that starts stuff for the gardeners, although that's unusual. And then they have berries that are communally gardened, and they have flowers. So there's a whole resource page about this, and they vary a lot, but I'm going to show you them. I think we have 5 on Bainbridge, but it might be 7, which is a huge number, but it's still not enough. And we have some in other parts of the county as well. So Rock Farm is on the north end on Bainbridge, and this is Johnson Farm, which is in the center. So it's nice to have your pea patch near your house, not too far away, but I would just go anywhere there's an open pea patch myself. These are both in town. The right one is behind the Congregational Church, and the left one's at Red Pine. Because there are so many people in apartments in town and condos, these have super long waiting lists. But if you really want to get into this one, I would just put your name on the list, and you might say, oh, it's going to be 2 years, but time will fly. And at the end of 2 years, would you rather say, oh, I made it, or, oh, I should have signed up, I still want one, but I'd still, I'd still a 2-year waiting list. So it doesn't hurt to get on the list for these guys. There's a big chart of these on the resource page, and it tells you who to call and how much it's going to cost and what you have to do when you participate. Battle Point has a big one. I couldn't get a picture of it, but it has a big one, and it has, I think it's 8 people on the waiting list, which is much better than the downtown ones. So it could, time flies and you'll get in. Rolling Bay is a new one. It's behind the Presbyterian Church in Rolling Bay. So theirs is a brand new, couple years old, I think. And there's one in Robb Park in Paulsbo, and Blueberry in Bremerton, because I know that we have members here tonight or attendees here tonight who don't live on Bainbridge. I live on Bainbridge, so I know a lot about them, and also about the Bainbridge ones. And also we just have a lot here. Kingston has one. It's very focused on community resilience and mutual aid, and it's only for Kingston residents. There's also on Bainbridge a Farmers and Gardeners Guild run by Heidi Madden. They have chickens and a greenhouse, and it's much more free form. You don't have your own plot, but you might decide you're going to grow a whole lot of escarole. And so you plant a big bunch of escarole, a lot of it, and then some of it's yours. And as I understand it, some of it can be picked by others. So, but she's open to like particular projects on her property and things like that. So that resource is on there too. You can also get a little bit of produce and a lot of knowledge by volunteering at Peaceful Morning Farm. John Chang is a great guy, and he grows thousands of pounds of food for local food banks all over the peninsula. And he also, while you're volunteering, will teach you what's going on. So you will set plants, or you will pick beans, and you will learn as you go. I was just talking to him the other day about, he said he wants to start his onions from seed in the greenhouse so he can teach his volunteers to do that. You don't have to volunteer regularly. You can contact him through the number in the resource page. And you can say, I just want to come down for 2 hours. And he'll say, great, come on Saturday. And you can do it once. And then if you like it, you can do it a whole bunch of times, or you can just do it once. And yeah, I've worked with him and he's great. He's also my neighbor. We need more pea patches. So is there anybody here who is thinking right now, gosh, I'd like a big bunch of vegetables next to my house. I want to like a lot of vegetables and it'd be really inspiring. And I have the space, but I don't have the energy to do it myself. Is there anybody who knows somebody who might have space to start a pea patch? That would help our community resilience as well.
I'm playing the lotto right now just so I can win enough money to put more pea patches on Bainbridge Island.
Oh, that's fantastic. I know you told me a scheme that didn't involve the lotto, but we're going to work on it later, right? To get one more, maybe. Well, if you do, I'm just saying, if you do, or if you have a friend and you're eyeing their property next week and thinking, you know what you should do with this? And if they're gung-ho, I can connect you with people who've created pea patches on private property, and they can tell you everything from watering systems to how to organize your beds to insurance. So I'm going to volunteer them that they're going to help you. Oh, there are also informal stuff in the beds, and they don't anymore. And then they're out and you talk to them and you get to know your neighbors. And there are a lot of people doing informal food growing on the island on other people's land just because they spoke to them twice. And then they said, I'm going to ask you a weird question and you can say no if you want. Please, it's a fully acceptable answer to say no, but what do you think about me growing food in there and then I split the crop with you? So I'll be your gardener and it's a win-win for us. So it's possible. Does anybody have a place where you garden, but it's not your land, but it's informal? Does anybody garden in a pea patch? You can just holler it if you want to tell us. We usually have quite a few people who have pea patch gardens.
Hey, Carol, it's Laura.
Hi, Laura.
About a month ago on Facebook, I think it was Bainbridge Island Gardeners, there was a property owner who I think had a more formal veggie garden, but like with greenhouses and everything. And they weren't able to keep it going. And so they put an all call out to anybody to come and start gardening on their space. So it's out there, like you said.
Yes, that's interesting. So that was actually starting gardening on the space. That's not the one that we were talking about earlier, where they had an overgrown garden that needed to be harvested, right?
This was it almost looked like a commercial or a small farm that maybe they were kind of not keeping up with, but it seemed like lots of things were already in place.
Wow.
It was pretty cool.
That's a dream. That's a dream for somebody who's energetic, or 5 friends with less energy, right? That's really cool. Are you going to do it, Laura? You going to break out?
Oh, no, I have my hands full right at my own house, but I thought it was cool.
You have a beautiful, beautiful place. Yeah.
Oh,
well, that's really cool. So that was on Bainbridge Gardeners?
Yep, Facebook on I think it was the Bainbridge Bainbridge Island Gardeners, I think.
Bainbridge Island Gardeners. Okay, great, cool. So now those are all the places that you might garden, and you know how you're going to find your son. And if you find that you don't like your own place for growing, you're going to get on a pea patch list. You know what else I would grow in my place and get on a pea patch list if I didn't have the perfect sun, if I didn't have great sun, like I have 4 to 6 hours or 3 to 4 hours of sun. I might start now growing at my place, and it's probably a small area at your place, and then you can get a pea patch bed as well. You're allowed. Now we're going to talk about, what kind of beds are you going to use? These are all raised beds. So this is actually Rock Farm. Pretty sure it's Rock Farm. So in the lower right corner, there are galvanized tubs. And there is one link on the resource page about galvanized tubs, because the question is, the galvanizing is supposed to be pure zinc and the steel is supposed to be pure steel, but those materials aren't, they're not made for storing food in them. So the question is, do my vegetables pick up little bits of metals that I wouldn't want to eat that might be mixed in with those metals? So there is one opinion piece on the research page, but it's an invitation for you to do your due diligence. But a lot of people grow veg in these. So John McInnes, you have a whole bunch of beds that are
I actually have 5 more of them in the back of my truck right now. I went down and bought them today at Wilco. They're having a sale on their 2x2x6 foot for $40 off. So yeah, wow. I have 15 last year. So this year I'll have 20.
Well, that is really nice. So $10 off at Wilco now.
$40 off. $40 off each one. So normally a 2x2x6. No, what I do is I buy the stock tank with the bottom in it, and then I cut the bottoms out. So the tanks, I don't do the raised beds with the open bottom, because they're seldom ever stocked anywhere, and you have to wait for them to come in.
Okay.
But the tanks themselves are normally $179 at Wilco. The month of February they're $139.
So some garden centers would have these without the bottoms, and you go to Wilco and buy them and cut the bottoms out. You just use a saw?
I use an angle grinder on the straight sections, and then I use a jigsaw with a metal blade on the curved section. And then I cut that out right up against the edge, and then I use that for winter cover on any of the beds that I don't want weeds to grow in, and I'm not growing that. Yeah, and I'm not growing anything in. But yeah, they work for me. I don't know. I've never researched the metal part of it, but I figure a plant's going to filter that out for the most part anyway, and I don't really grow anything up against the sides. Yeah, I don't grow anything up against the sides, so they work for me.
So, and do people, I don't know if anybody ever just like makes holes in the bottom and then treats them like a big pot, but I imagine they do. But they might not drain well in a garden setting like that. They probably would have to have feet on them or something. So they probably have to be bottomless. Well, anyway, that's an option. And there are other versions of metal beds. And then there are some paver beds, right? Or edger beds. So those are simple to construct. There are wood beds in the back. If you do a raised bed, to get the benefits of a raised bed, which is that they drain better. So if you have a soggy patch in your yard, you can do a raised bed, and then they provide better drained soil. They also warm up a little bit early in the spring. The stone ones take a while to warm up, but they retain a little bit more heat, like at night. If you want those benefits of warming up and draining, it should be at least a foot tall. So this one back here is a foot. That's the minimum. I think that's a foot. Yeah. So here are some other raised beds, and I'll tell you what the considerations are for each of them. Of course, this is great if you don't want to bend over. The considerations are that you need to make it out of very sturdy materials like 4x4s, and definitely cedar. And the bottom is going to have to hold up a lot of wet soil under sort of rotting pressure, right? So you want to make sure that that's screwed on and as stable as possible, and maybe even reinforced with like a metal support underneath. These are good for berries and herbs, like strawberries and herbs and lettuces, but a tomato doesn't want that shallow soil, but it can be very satisfying to have those. These guys are great. There's no bottom on these. You want to fill it up all the way because the soil is going to settle. And some people will fill it to here, like 3 or 4 inches from the top, and then it settles down another 5 inches. And so it's basically a box that's hiding way down inside it some vegetables growing almost at ground level. So you want to make sure it's full so that when you fill it, so that when it settles, it's also pretty full. If you use cedar, you get 6 to 8 years, they say. Although John Fawcett, yours rotted sooner, right?
Yeah, I had some that rotted sooner, and I have 2 left that I've probably had 6 or 7 years now.
Okay. So you do end up having to replace a raised bed sometimes, depending on what it's made of, but it has advantages in other ways. It's great if you have a south-facing slope, that gets a lot of sun. There's one on Baker Hill. It's south-facing. It's way up at the road, like there's a road and then a big ditch and then this garden. And they've captured this perfect place to grow veg. You can put pathways between here so they don't have to be abutting each other. It can be a pathway and a bed and a pathway and a bed. So they can definitely make use of a slope that otherwise wouldn't be usable for food anyway. I thought these were kind of interesting. You just slide boards into them vertically, so the edges won't rot out. And when you need to replace, you can pull the boards straight out. Of course, you've got to get the soil scooched over first. And then so that they'll stack on each other. So you could do 2, and you can put rebar down the middle deep into the soil so that they will be stable and stay upright. And this is never gonna, it's gonna last a really long time. I just happened to see it at the street, on the street in Seattle. Although I'm sure that I would bang my shins on it. Really heavy metal. If you have logs, even if they're fir, if I had like more fir all over my property, little fir logs that I could get hold of, and not as much cash as I wished, then I would totally do this. Even though fir will rot out, you can replace them, or these can, go for 5 years or 6 years, and then you just do something else. I wouldn't use the wood pegs that they're held together with. I would use the rebar that's shown on the right-hand side, like a 3 or 4 foot piece of rebar, and then drive it in as far as you can. And they have to be on the inside as well as the outside of the bed. And if you're using this to hold boards instead of logs, you want to reinforce the center right here. You just want to drive a rebar outside of it because they'll bow outward. Does anybody have another idea for beds that you love, or any questions? Get a word in edgewise, y'all.
I was wondering if I could send a photo of my terrace.
Yes, Debbie Cothers, you can. And hello.
How do I do that?
You can send it to, let's see, I guess send it to me.
Okay, to your email.
And yeah, and I'll just see what we can do. Because John,
Okay.
do you want to have her just share? Can we have her share? Can you give her permission if I stop? You're muted. John, you're muted.
Hang on a second. I'm trying something.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Go ahead and see if it'll let you share your picture.
I'm going to stop. Oh,
You won't have to. It's multiple participants.
Okay.
So,
oh yeah. So if I click share.
Share on the bottom of the screen.
Oh, share on the bottom of the screen. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, this is new tech for me. Share screen. Oh, share screen. There we go. Okay, and then that's.
And then it should choose the picture that you want to share.
Okay, that one. All right. Did that do anything?
It's sharing your screen. Oh, there it is.
Okay. I can make that bigger. There we go. That's my terrace.
Oh. Did you put that in?
Yeah, yeah, I put it in a year and a half ago. This was the first year I planted it.
Wow, I love the shape.
Yeah, I don't like straight lines.
I don't either.
Aw.
But it's southwest facing. It holds the heat, like Carol was saying.
Yeah,
And I made each terrace the right height to be able to stand and garden.
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of cool.
you know
Are
what?
you
Anyway.
near New Sweden?
No, I'm in the middle of the island.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd seen something like similar to that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that.
You're welcome. Okay,
Yeah,
I don't know how to unshare.
So
Do you
go
do
down to the
that?
bottom and put stop share.
Okay. Oops. Um,
It could be at the top. Just look around the
oh,
screen.
yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Is there a walkway at
The,
the in front of each ledge? Is that a little walkway along there?
yeah, there's a little stone
Okay.
path in front of each one. Stop
Oh,
share.
cool.
Okay, there we go.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
Really neat.
And then it's reinforced so the wall stays up, or do you
Yeah,
not have to
I
do?
used the wall blocks. And so that each one has a
Mm,
little lip behind it. Each one's set
hmm
back just a little bit. And
Did
then
you have
there's
hmm
drainage behind a couple of them just to make sure the water doesn't back up behind the
How
retaining
cool is
walls.
that?
to have that engineered?
Um, I planned it out and then I had some guys do the installation. I hauled all the blocks, but
Okay.
I'm not a builder. I had some other
Okay.
guys install it.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
It's fun.
wonderful. Thank you so much for showing me. I can't wait for you to invite me over,
Okay. We'll have to see if I get a garden in this year.
with or without. It's okay. It's all right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So you can do in-ground beds. My beds are all in-ground because I just wanted to make food come up out of the ground. So even the ones on the left are considered in-ground. The ones in the middle, this person has made rounded beds. Some of them are fairly flat on top. I like them to be kind of flat on top because I think once the soil gets dry in the summer, they they absorb the water better if it's not running off. Some people like a rounded bed, and Lovejoy likes a gently rounded mound. The picture on the right is my front yard, and it looks, you can see most of the lines are pretty straight. So I just cut into it and removed the lawn. I chopped up all the grass that was within the area, and I picked sort of 8 by 8 squares up by the grassy hair, and I smashed the soil against the side of a spade because I wanted all the soil out from the roots. And then I composted the grass and put fertilizer and compost into the soil directly. So it's even tighter than it looks usually. But anyway, those are your in-ground beds, and you can certainly do that. You treat them differently though. But if you're going to do in-ground beds, you need to get rid of the lawn. So you want to get rid of, I would actually dig out plants that are not grass if you have lawn. Get these guys out, like all their roots. So you shove the shovel in and you pull it backward and you lever them out, and then you smash them on the shovel and then you throw them in the compost. And then for the grass, one option is to slice it out like this and then compost it. There are some other ways. Did somebody want to say something? Hey, Keith, what's up?
Yeah. Hey, Carol. I'm going back to the raised beds. So I've got a couple of 4 by 8, and we're gonna kind of rearrange things and go to 4
Mhm.
raised beds. And right now they're only, one piece of cedar. I don't know what that is, 6, 8 inches or whatever. And I want to make them.
Mhm.
The ones I made, I went out to Lowe's or Home Depot and bought it and, made it myself. But do you have any recommendations for, I've been looking, online, and there's lots of places that sell them pre-made and that are taller. So any thoughts about if you or anyone else has had success buying, and it's probably not more economical, but there are some that actually seem cheaper buying, through a gardening place versus doing it yourself. So,
And they're really cedar and they're really thick.
yeah, yeah, most of them, I'm trying to be conscientious about the material, obviously, right? So, But yeah, they seem like
cedar lasts a
I found
long
a
time.
couple that were really seemed like pretty good deals, and they were taller. So
Yeah. So like if you have a 2x8 right now, I wouldn't go thinner than that. And some of them are like a 1x, which is really like 7/8 or 3/4 or whatever 1x is. And I think those are too thin. So I would check that. And I would check if the corners are made of wood, I'd want 4x4s, not 2x2s in the corners. Anybody else have an opinion about that?
yeah, I think Melissa has her hand up, but I found a Seattle Urban Gardening. I don't know if you guys follow them, but I follow them on Instagram. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've got a really nice video about how they make their 4x8 beds and how they alternate
Oh, okay.
on the ends, they alternate how they put them together, and they put 4x4s on each corner. And I was going to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but like I said, I just didn't know if anyone else had good experience buying pre-made and more economical over.
Well, if anybody does, would you put it in the chat so that we can have access to it? That would be super. I have one raised bed, I confess, and I got it from somebody who made it from scratch. And then I've made raised beds for other people and actually for myself now that I think of it. But I just made them. So I'm sorry I don't have a brand recommendation, but I hope somebody else does. Okay, so there is a way to, some people do this. They don't dig the lawn out. They just dig out the perennial, like the weeds that aren't grass. And then they put several layers of cardboard over the top with absolutely no gaps, like overlapping cardboard. And then they put down their beds, and then they fill up the beds. And on the cardboard, they put 4 inches of wood chip. So if you were to put 4 inches of wood chip on here, the beds wouldn't be sticking up much above the wood chip. But you can do it this way. If I did it this way, I would want to block and kill the grass over here, over to the right, and in front with a really wide path. Because sometimes if the grass is right next to your bed, it's just going to keep growing up underneath the bed. So I would have paths around there. Anne Lovejoy there's a link on the resource page. Anne Lovejoy describes doing this, and you put the chips where you want the paths, and you put, even without edges, none of these beds, you just put, you get raised bed mix, and then you just make gently rounded mounds, and you just basically set your beds, edgeless beds, on these mounds. So it's a way to get a quick garden where you don't have to spend a lot of money and you are just gardening right away. So that is a possibility. You can see that worksheet if you want. So bed tips, no wider than 4 feet, because you're going to have to you don't get to walk in these beds. So because it wrecks the soil. So you're going to crouch and reach over, or sit next to it and reach over. And fill it all the way, because otherwise you get that picture on the right-hand side. And why did you even put in that extra board if you're not using it for root space? Put your climbers on the north ends of your beds if you're going to have trellises. I move my trellises. I don't have permanent trellises, but I put them on the north end because anything north of a tall plant is going to be in the shade, even most of our summers. And we don't want to shade the rest of the garden. Make sure your paths are wide enough for kneeling. See, this guy can't get his leg between the beds easily, his ankles across one of the bed edges. So at least wide enough to kneel in. And you might want to consider it being comfortable enough for you to turn a wheelbarrow in if you're going to be using a wheelbarrow a lot and you don't want to like back out from your garden. So you might consider that. And then I would keep the size flexible. I wouldn't pave like a patio all the way around it so that you can't make it bigger, because what happens is people wish they could grow more, and they can't make their garden bigger, and then they just crowd it, and then the plants fail or they're puny, right? And they think gardening's not that fun, and they quit. So I would be able to expand it if you need to. So you can start small and know if you have the energy to expand it. You can also grow in containers. The upper left is washing machines, commercial washing machines. The lower left, it's plastic, and I don't know about the wisdom of that, but that is a salad bar from the 1980s. And she decided she'd put herbs in it. Salad bar like a Pizza Hut or something. Little containers can accommodate plants, but they're so small that they dry out really easily. So this is amazing to get lettuce this big. This person is probably fertilizing with a water-soluble fertilizer every week and probably watering up to twice a day to keep that moist. John Fawcett, who's just stepped away, had strawberries in very shallow planters, and they dried out really fast, he said. But they can be handy. And this person even put some on their fence. If your fence is the only thing that gets any sun in your yard, as sometimes is cruelly true, then you can put things on your fence. Don't bolt them to the fence, though. These are on sort of legs. They're being held up by those legs. The weight is being taken by those legs on the side, and then they're just being supported by the fence in the sense that they won't fall over. It's just for balance. Okay, why did I do that? Container tips. They need holes in the bottom. Some people forget that. Your plant will drown if you don't have holes, and holes that drain well. They need more frequent water, of course, and you need to give them soluble, balanced organic fertilizer. So you can just go to the garden center and tell them what you're up to, and they'll give you a recommendation for that. Bigger and deeper is better. Sometimes they say tomatoes can grow in a 5-gallon. I guess that's true if you have one that's marked patio, or a patio tomato that's small. But a tomato would really like 30-gallon containers. So go at least 10 and bigger if you can. But sometimes landscapers who put in trees will have really, really big containers, and sometimes they will give them to you. And little shallow, if you have something that's shallow, lettuce and strawberries and herbs are okay, but it should be at least 9 inches deep, I think. So now you've got where to put it, how to find your sun, where to put it, and what kind of bed, but what are you going to fill it up with? So let's look. So raised beds are pots. Raised beds are big pots. You cannot go and just put like the dirt that was under your lawn or something, or some forest soil, and put it in your raised bed necessarily, because raised beds have to drain well. And that soil, weirdly, the garden soil works in the garden on, at ground level, but it doesn't work well once you make a big pile of it in a raised bed. So you get something called raised bed and raised bed mix usually. You can get it in bags. You can also get it in bulk. And I'm going to tell you about that in a minute, what all your sources are. And dang, I have to get a fly out of my cup. Drink around it. You're going to fill it with raised bed mix or potting mix if it's pot. And ask your nursery person. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, it's raised bed mix, but it's not rich enough. So you might ask them, should I put organic compost in there with it? And they'll say, yeah, and they'll advise you about how much for the amount that you're buying. So you can ask your nursery person for advice. I've talked too much. Okay. And then you're also going to add an organic balanced fertilizer. And you're going to work the compost and the balanced fertilizer gently into the top 8 inches. You don't have to beat the bed up. You just want to get it introduced in there so that the organisms in the soil can eat it and break it down for your plants. So there's a brand called Down to Earth. Dr. Earth is another brand, but Down to Earth is a little less expensive. And to know how much to put on, you just read the box. And in the second year, for a beginner using raised beds, I would add 1 inch of compost. Sometimes people do 1/2 inch, but it's usually recommended you do 1 inch. And balanced vegetable garden or all-purpose fertilizer, organic, again, into the top 8 inches every spring. And if you plant something in the early spring and then you pull the whole plant out, like you pull out a broccoli, and then you're going to put in, I don't know, maybe a pepper plant, a bunch of pepper plants, you want to reapply a little bit of fertilizer for them because the broccoli will have eaten it. But in future years, I'd like you to get a soil test, because if we keep putting balanced fertilizer on, some tests another time, but this is just if you're beginning. If you are an experienced gardener and you put balanced fertilizer on every year, it might work, but sometimes the phosphorus in that fertilizer doesn't get used up and it keeps building up in the soil, and then that can compete with the calcium in your soil, and your plants will act like they don't have any calcium in the soil when in fact they do, but the phosphorus is the problem. So that's why you'd want to get a soil test. And I have a video that will tell you about that later in the year. In-ground beds, I already said what you're going to do, that you're going to gently turn into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil some balanced organic fertilizer and 2 to 4 inches of compost. If you have that kind of builder soil where they had to scrape the lot, so your soil is not dark brown like the soil in the upper right, but it's like pale yellow or whitish or something like that, that's subsoil probably. So I would definitely go with 4 inches of compost. That is a heavy recommendation. A lot of people don't recommend that at first, but it works for me. Works really well. And in fact, so you put on the fertilizer, you put on the compost, you don't have to dig them in separately. As you're doing the digging, if you can get your fork way down in the soil as far as you can and loosen it, it says at the top line, second line here, it says 8 to 24 inches down. I can't get down more than 8 inches in my garden because there are glacial boulders in there, those cobbles, and they're embedded in glacial till. So it's like fantastic roadway. It's like the Appian Way underneath my garden, but it works fine. I just loosen as deep as I can. And as I'm doing that, I'm also working the compost and fertilizer into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil gently. You don't need to rototill. It's not good for your soil. I guess if you were doing 40 beds, and you needed to do something mechanical because you're basically starting a farm, you might do it once, but it is very hard on the soil, and soil is not supposed to be powder. And then your year 2, you're going to do similar. You're going to add 1 inch of compost and fertilizer. Yeah. Does anybody have something you want to say about this?
Question. So when you see people who are like throwing out or throwing down tarps or plastic on top of their soil so it warms up, is that something that you would put your fresh dirt, your compost, your fertilizer, you would do that like late winter if you could work the soil and then drape something over it to keep it warm?
Warm it.
Or what's our thinking on that?
Black plastic. I can send you the data on this. A citizen science. Black plastic does not warm the soil very much because it makes it dark. It makes a shadow. But around here, our soil early on is usually both too wet to work and too cool to grow in. So if you want to warm it up, you can warm it up after you probably couldn't dig into it when you're doing this. So typically we warm it up and dry it out first. So for example, for peas, just on the pea bed, wherever I'm going to put my peas, I'll put clear plastic down. And, it's just trash plastic. It's like I got a pillowcase and I just slit the bag and put it down with rocks on the edges just for the peas. And then that's warmer. I suppose, could you do that on your whole garden? Probably. It's a little bit anaerobic, if you put the food into the soil and then you want them to have oxygen enough to break down the stuff, right? The compost and the fertilizer. Sealing your garden in plastic, although I admit to having thrown plastic over something when I didn't want it to get weeds. It's probably not the best practice, but for short term, to dry out the soil and warm it up, you can use the clear plastic just where you want to plant an early crop. And the reason you have to dry out the soil is we don't dig wet soil. So you do a test on it. Maybe this is the next thing. The next one. Nope. You do a test. There'll be a slide on it later. Have you ever heard this one, Laura? You take a handful of your soil and you squeeze it and you open it up and it should form a ball. And if it doesn't, and it's just powder, that's too dry. But if it forms a ball, then you poke it, give it a good poke, and it should break into like 3 or 4 chunks. It shouldn't smush. If it smushes, then it's too wet to work. And because soil structure is super important for the living organisms in there. So you're thinking, put the compost down and then warm it up. I guess if you wanted to warm it up, I'd be concerned about oxygen for the buggies, but I would have to talk to somebody who's more of a soil scientist than I am about that. But if you did want to warm it in early spring, it's clear plastic, not black.
That dark stuff. And I might just be trying to jump into garden tasks a little too early too. But thank you.
Oh gosh, I feel like there's so much to do out there. Good for you. You're probably on top of it. Yeah, and you can always warm it up with, where you're going to put peas. Okay, so let's look at compost. There is a whole chart of compost and what's in the compost for local manufacturers and how much it costs. Actually, the costs are somewhat updated, but you'd want to check on that and where they are and all kinds of stuff. So if you want to look at your compost chart on your resource page, you can. The point here is just that if you get the worst compost you could get, cheapest, most horrible compost, a yard of it, which is a 3 by 3 by 3 foot pile, is going to cost maybe $75. If you get better compost, ask your garden center, which is the good stuff. It can cost you $240 if you buy it in bags. So it's expensive in bags. If you have it delivered to your house, that same yard can be between $40 and $100. But if you go get it yourself, it can be between $27 and $98 generally. So there is cost savings. It requires some labor, right? And some mess. You can always put on your birthday presents list that you'd like 4 yards of compost delivered onto your front yard, which in my family, we do that a lot. So there is a whole chart about that. And you need more than you think, because you think a yard, that's huge. But if you have a 4 by 8 foot bed that's 3 inches deep, a yard will cover 3 of those. So if you have 3 4 by 8 beds, and you just want to put 3 inches of compost on top because you already filled them with bed fill, then you can, then that's going to be a whole yard of compost for 3 of those beds. So you have to know how much you need. So if you have a 4 by 8 bed by 1 foot tall bed, 4 times 8 times 1 is 32 feet. Well, a yard is just 27 feet. So you're going to need over a yard. Fortunately, you don't have to do the math. I definitely think you should if you're an arithmetic sort of person, because it's good for your brain. But you could just look up Google compost calculator, and you'll get one of these. And they just then multiply it by how many beds you have. And you can just get the right amount. What about, are there herbicide residues in our compost? Well, next month, we're going to go to Olympic Organics. And we're going to learn how they test for herbicides and how they protect us from those as much as they can. Because there are some bagged composts that use solids from municipal waste solids or, sewage solids and things like that. And then other places use garden waste and like grocery store trim and things like that. So we're going to talk about that. So bagged products, if you really want to be careful, they're not usually made from yard waste. Ole Mountain Fish, which is the third one down here, it's made from wood waste and fish waste. And it says in the chart where you can get it. Vern's has something called Pretty Prep, and they say it's tested chemical free. There are some chemicals that are active below our ability to detect them, but they have tested it. And the second one in the list, or Olympic Organics, they use Town and Country's veg trim, which I think is really cool way to keep it local. They test for 2 persistent herbicides that they're very careful about it. So those are things that I know that you might want to use for information if you're concerned about herbicides.
Carol, on the Olympic, on the Oily Mountain fish compost at Vern's, if you look on the Vern's website, they will clarify that it contains a high amount of post-consumer waste. I got a yard of that.
Okay.
I got a yard of that last year. Yeah, Oily Mountain fish. I think that's where they get it from on Vern's. I got a yard of that last year. I spent hours picking out plastic pieces out of that. So it's not only wood. I know that might advertise.
And that's not the Pretty Prep?
Excuse me?
That's Oily Fish?
I believe it's Oily Fish, but it's whatever Vern's has on their fish compost. But if you're expecting real clean fertilizer and want to get the fish compost that Vern's has, look on their website. They even clarify that it contains quite a bit. I think they've gotten a lot of complaints on that. So
I'm so glad you told me that, because Oily Fish didn't used to do that at all. But Pretty Prep, everybody thought it didn't have municipal waste in it, and it definitely does, because I called them and they said, "Oh yeah, it always has." So
there was some sort of a shortage or a switchover or whatever last year, but I know they put that on a website, and I will testify to spending hours picking out little bits of plastic, the little the food stickers, the plastic bags.
Yeah, and for you that was Oily Fish.
I don't know what it was. It was whatever Vern's had.
Okay. It's at Vern's though, so you want to check it out, make sure. You can actually go to Vern's. Well, I have, and I've said I want to look at your compost. So that's good to know, John. Thank you so much.
Carol, D is sharing that Tills, I found this out last year as well. They don't carry the Oily Fish anymore. They make their own. And we used it last year and had great success.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, Oily Fish is really good. It's really expensive too. Obviously, I just need to update that slide. I was so careful about so many slides, and then I just went skipping that one. So I'll have to update that. Okay, squeeze and poke. Dry and warm your soil early by putting clear plastic over it. I wouldn't do the whole bed because it'll dry out before you have to put other things in. But if you want to just do the part where you're going to put your early veg in, and you want to be able to dig it before you want it to be able to pass the squeeze and poke test before it ordinarily would, because it's so rainy, then you can put clear plastic over it just for a while, few weeks. Hand dig if you can. If you're making your own compost for manure, ask me about herbicides. You can email me separately and I'll tell you about it. Okay, so just a little bit about protecting the beds. I like these sprinklers. They are great for deer, not so great for rabbits, unfortunately. So what can we do? Of course you can have a fence, but you might be in a property that you don't own it and you can't fence it, or you just don't want to do a fence. Like I don't want to have a fence. So that works for the deer, but this works for the rabbits. This is re-meshed. I hope that's on the resource page. These squares are 6 by 6 inches. It comes in a big panel. It's usually a 4 by 8 panel. So this is the 8-foot dimension across the bed. You'd think it would be the lengthwise, but it's going to be 4 feet, like 4 feet long, and 8 feet. It takes 8 feet across, even though once you bend it, it's not 8 feet across. And it's covered in deer netting, not bird netting. Bird netting is awful, but deer netting is heavier, slightly easier to work with. And I put it on like I was putting a sheet on a bed. I did hospital corners. And then I zip tie it on at the bottom. And then it comes all the way down here. And see that piece of wood? It's supposed to be on the front also. There's supposed to be a piece of wood here to which it has been attached, the netting, so that the netting stays down, the rabbits can't get in. So that's a way. I'm going to make you feel like a growing genius, Speedy Quick here. The things on the left are for spring, and they'll grow into summer, but you don't want them in your blistering hot spot, and fall. So they can get started pretty early. April, they can usually go in, some in March. So notice that those aren't a lot of fruiting things, but the things on the right, they need heat. These are things that make fruits. So we're going to wait for those and really wait, and not just for that one warm week in March where you think, oh, tomato time. You're going to wait well into May for putting those tomatoes out. And don't use national planting calendars, because see all those gold areas that are gold like us? They're all in our zone. And sometimes the national planting calendar will say, here's what you should do. And they're talking about Georgia. They're not talking about us generally. So what do we use instead? We use these. They are on the resource page. And this is one of my favorite ones because he tells us exactly when he does things. And people say, oh, that's so uptight. He doesn't give me a big window. I don't want to know a window. I want to know exactly when does he do it so it really works. And then I can mess around with it. I can plant early or late if I want to. I am a free agent. So it says here, start basil inside around the 15th of the month. And it goes all the way but through the year for you. So I love that. I highly advise you to use that one. That's my opinion. You might have your own favorites. You can put them in the chat. Choose Northwest adapted varieties. Where are we going to buy these things? So cabbages and stuff that are cool weather, they like it here. They don't really have to be specially Northwest adapted, but tomatoes, it's kind of challenging for those. Peppers, eggplants, corn. We need adapted varieties for here. Well, guess who has those things? So many people have those things. So there is a list of all of these on your resource page, and it tells specifically, where are they? Are they Northwest? Do they do anything special? So almost all of these are Northwest. Uprising and Deep Harvest and Peace Seedlings and a few other ones sell from these two brilliant breeders, Carol Deppy and Alan Capuler, who are here for our resilience. They're here to breed plants that are great for the Northwest and also delicious and work really well. So that's already recorded on the page. High Mowing and Johnny's are not from the Northwest. They're from the Northeast, but they're Northern. So we still have very similar conditions. You want to read the entries about the veg that you're buying. If it says, this thing is great, this plant is great to -10 below, it just can't take rain, then that's not your plant. So we're going to look for words that tell us that the particular plant you're looking at that comes from the Northeast is going to be good here. The two on the right, True Love and Baker Creek, Baker Creek's actually from Missouri, and True Love is from Utah. So why do I have them? It's because they have quite a few seeds from the many different ancestral cultures that people in America have come from. So I include that because people are sometimes looking for the okra that grandma grew or something like that. So they're really worth looking at. They're very interesting. And if you know Kitazawa seed, True Love bought them. Kitazawa was the oldest seller of Asian origin seeds, varieties in the US. They were like 100 years old. So what's happening now? So these are the words that we look for when you're reading a description, a soil of a variety. It'll say things like good, cool soil emergence, often for corn, because you often direct seed that. Tolerates cool nights. It's early, it's short season, or it has a short number of days to maturity. And the way you know that is you look through the catalog if it's paper, or you click around and see some other samples of that kind, like if it's corn. And if a lot of the corn say 140, and you can find a corn that says 95 days, you're going to go for that corn. But yeah, that's a good way to do it. Give them space. The person on the left bought, it looks like a 4-pack of cabbages and couldn't bear to kill any of them. So she jammed them into a small space. But a cabbage really needs about 2 feet on each side, at least 18 inches on each side, because the cabbage is supposed to look like the thing on the right. It's a huge plant that grows this ball in the middle. So when you think about like a cabbage head, it needs way more space than just the cabbage head. And just to reinforce that, those are drawings of the actual roots in situ of an onion and a carrot. So they don't have to be 5 feet away from each other, but if you read the seed packet and it tells you how close to plant them, then pay attention. So here's what usually happens. See the seed spacing right here? It says plant them 2 inches apart. But then we plant them 2 inches apart, and then we know we have to thin them, and we lose the packet, and we throw it out, or it's in the garage and we can't find it. And so we go, okay, I'm going to pull out a few. And we pull out enough so that they're about 8 inches apart. And then we say, okay, but I know I have to be brutal. So we pull it out so they're 10 inches apart. And then we try to grow them. And then we find the packet later. Look at this. You're supposed to thin them to 2 feet apart. So you're supposed to sow them and then kill most of them. And it's hard for us tender-hearted gardeners to do that. But giving them enough space is really going to be worth it. And you can keep in mind that is the biologic plan of the plant. They are evolved to make billions too many babies, well, thousands too many babies, and then have a lot of them die off. That's the point for them. Let me show you. Oh yeah, you don't? Okay, here. Those are Brussels sprouts on the left. They couldn't even outgrow the pest insects. Brussels sprouts are supposed to look like the one on the right. So that's a 1-foot bed. That bed is 1 foot tall, and those Brussels sprouts are about 3.5. I mean, they grew to be about 3.5. Those are in my garden, and they're about 3 feet wide. And then they're going to produce a lot for you. So I just want to encourage you to, like, I'd rather have you grow one Brussels sprout that's amazing and tells you how great you are as a grower than 6 Brussels sprouts that were bad and frustrates you. And you don't have to plant in rows, but how close should you plant them if you don't plant in rows? Because the packet doesn't tell you how to, if you plant them like cookie sheet style here on the right, here's what you do. It will say on the packet, plant them 6 inches apart in rows 3 feet apart, for example. So add 36 inches, that's 3 feet, to 6, and you get 42, and then you divide it by 2. So you just average these two numbers, and then you plant like this. So the distance isn't from the edge of one plant to the other, it's from the middle. So they should be 21. I'm never going to measure 21 inches. I'm going to go like, I don't know, somewhere around 20 something. Anyway, you know, you don't have to be like out there with a centimeter ruler, but they should be 21 inches in all directions. So these are actually further this way, which is fine. But the reason you would do this is that you sometimes will allow you to put more plants in a bed. And do you see that they're in from the edge of the bed? Because they need to have roots out here too, right? I mean, you could put them against the side, but they're probably going to suffer. So they won't get as much root space. So you want to put them in a little bit. This is, and we want to water them. We want to mulch them and keep them happy. And we want to grow small successions. Don't plant all your lettuce at once like this. You plant a little bit of lettuce and a little bit of chard. And then later, when that lettuce is almost mature, you start more lettuce like next to it. And I'll teach you more about that in a future class or in a video. So I'm going to teach you succession planting in the future. And we're also going to talk covers and how to do season extension in the future. Let's see what else is going on. These are all the things you can do now. So you can sign up for reminders and build your structures and get your fertilizer and your raised bed mix and your compost. And look at lots of seed catalogs. Growers who currently have things in the garden, if you have carrots, parsnips, or beets, or any potatoes that you left in the ground, get those out because they're going to start growing and they're going to use the delicious good stuff that's inside the beet to grow new plant. And your beets are going to be not so good. So take them out, rinse them, top them, tail them, and put them in the fridge. I'd put them in the fridge and chill them, and then I'd put them in a plastic bag with paper towels, and they'll last for months. And Yeah. Oh, don't pull your Brussels sprouts or kale or cabbage. I mean, you can. You're a grown up, but if you leave them, you'll get these things that are over here. That it's called broccoli rabe or kale rabe, and they are so delicious. Toss them in olive oil and salt and roast them hot, like 425. Yum. We typically plant peas late Feb to early March, mid-March, and TILF in Seattle is having a plant sale. March 15th is their first one. So write this word down, TILF. It's called the TILF Alliance, I think. And it's March 15th. And they have a program to have starts that are from culturally sensitive start program that where they're growing callaloo and napa and all kinds of things for that people are interested in getting. March field trip. That's the prettiest picture ever of Olympic organics, I think. So keep an eye out for that. We don't have a date for that yet. It's not going to be the first Tuesday. So we won't be back here on the first Tuesday as far as we know, but we're working on our field trip date. And the future topics are on your resource page. So you can look at those. And we're done.